So those are the big three, I guess you could say, for unrestricted free agents. You mentioned a deal for a guy like Dylan Cousins with the term. It might not be something that they could do. Bowen Byram's going to need a contract in the offseason, but he's still an RFA, as you've brought up on the show. So we're going to just talk about the UFAs real quick here, and they're most likely going to be sellers. You'd expect Kevyn Adams to hopefully try to make some sort of good hockey trade, but, like he found with the Byram for Middlestat swap last year, but who knows what that would be. So we're going to talk about here to end the show, Zucker, Greenway, and Jokiharju. Austin, do you expect all three of those guys to move? And if so, are you expecting any sort of significant return for any three of those guys?
Jokiharju, I wouldn't expect any sort of significant return. Would I expect him to? I don't even know if I expect him to be moved, honestly, because he's not really a name that you've been seeing out there. But also it makes sense because he hasn't had that good of a year. So like maybe a team looking for defensive depth, right? Like I think it was a couple years back, Buffalo traded Robert Hagg to the Panthers. So like there's a trade out there for him somewhere, I'm sure. He's still only 25. Like, he's young. He's a right shot defenseman. Don't think the return there would be significant. The other two are interesting. Obviously, Zucker's been having a phenomenal year, playing in top line minutes. I feel like there's definitely some value to be had there. Greenway hasn't played a lot, isn't producing a lot, but if you just look at him, he's big, he can skate, he can kill penalties, he has physical edge. He is the type of player that teams would love to acquire for a playoff push, so I expect there to be significant interest in him as well. The interesting part, the kicker, is we've heard reports that Buffalo was going to try to keep Zucker. We've heard, Greenway told Lance Lozowski he would love to sign an extension in Buffalo, which I thought was interesting because, you don't have to say that, right? Like, you can just do the standard. We'll see what happens at the trade deadline. If I'm here, I want to be here. Like, you know what I mean? So it's just kind of interesting that he said he would like to sign an extension here. But what is interesting to me is if they do have interest in keeping both of them, are they willing to risk keeping them past the deadline? Because that, to me, would be a mistake. I would love it if both of them are here. I got into some, I've seen it on Sabres Twitter. It's a bit of a debate. Why not keep both? They're two guys that have had an impact and be productive. And I'm like, yeah, I agree with anyone who says that. But the problem is, if you're keeping both of those guys, that means you got to move two of the other ones. Under no circumstance can they run back the same forward group. I don't care what anyone says. I know forwards aren't exactly the problem here, but under no circumstances can they run back the same forward. If you're keeping Greenway and Zucker, that means you got to look to be moving a guy like Quinn, or a guy like Cousins, or even potentially a guy like Krebs. Like, you have to be moving two other forwards then. The reason I think it's just easy to look at Greenway and Zucker and move them is because they're not tied to this team. Those are the guys that move at the trade deadline. So we'll see. I'm interested to see how the Sabres handle it. This could be a moot point because, they could announce extensions for them next week before the trade deadline, and then nothing matters there. But even if the Sabres do get some good value with these guys for the deadline, any picks that they get here, I don't have confidence in it, but I hope Kevyn Adams is smart enough to use those picks as currency to go get something else, because we cannot be acquiring second-round picks and then those second-round picks to draft players. That's just not what the Sabres should be now. So it'll be an interesting trade deadline. It honestly will be.
Yeah, I mean, the draft pick and prospect cupboard is as stacked as you could want it. You mentioned they need to start turning that into players that are going to be ready now. I mean, they've talked about being, building through the draft. Well, they've been doing that for the last 14 years and it hasn't worked multiple times, and they keep, retrying that, and that's great and all, but you need to start turning this thing into those NHL players, top six players, top six forward, which is something that they've talked about. I think the interesting part to me, Austin, is the Granlund trade from San Jose to Dallas kind of setting the market for pending UFAs this year. I know we're still waiting for Rickard Rakell, if he's going to be possibly moved from Pittsburgh. We know Pittsburgh's in full, ready to fire sale, except if your name's not Crosby or Malkin. It's going to be harder for them to move a guy like Erik Karlsson with his contract. But I look at that Granlund trade. They also got Cody Ceci, if you count him as an asset. But they got a first and third round pick, and I know I think the third is has a condition on it as well. But regardless, a first round pick for Michael Granlund as a UFA forward who is playing on San Jose's top line because they have such a young team there. They'll be in town next Tuesday. I'll be there for that game, but. It's interesting that there's always that one trade that sets the market for unrestricted free agents, and I think what we saw for the Granlund trade, if the Sabres could get anything close to that for Jason Zucker, who's arguably had pretty much the same production that you saw Granlund have in San Jose on their top power play unit, playing on their top line with their young players. Zucker's got 9 power play goals, so first and a third might be a stretch, and if you add CC in there, maybe, I don't know, somehow that adds value, but if you're looking at that for a Sabres perspective, to at least get those assets in, to hopefully then go and use as ammunition to get something bigger in the offseason, as you mentioned, go big game hunting. I'd be okay with that. If Zucker is moved, I want it to be something of that nature as opposed to just moving him for a third-round pick, because I'd rather just keep him at that point.
Yeah, like you said, I think Granlund might have a slight edge in production there, but same age, same contract status, things like that. Yeah, like I said, I do not think they should be collecting picks and prospects. But if someone calls you up and offers you a first-round pick for Jason Zucker, like, you have to take that.
Yep.
And then you have another piece to potentially go elsewhere with. Yeah, so if someone comes in and offers you a first-round pick for one of these two guys, you have to take it. It's just not good asset management to not take that, unless you are certain an extension is going to get done.
Right. And there hasn't been indication that there is going to be one before March 8th.
No, like my thinking was, and again, there is no blueprint to this stuff, but my thinking was if extension for either one of those guys was going to happen, it was going to happen over the Four Nations break, right? We saw Vancouver announce the O'Connor and Lankinen extensions during that time. I think we saw another extension too. Correct me if I'm wrong, but even if we didn't, to me was the perfect time to get it done. It wasn't announced. Now, again, this doesn't mean anything. There's still, a week and a half until the trade deadline, so it still could happen. But my thinking was, if it didn't happen then, it's not happening now. If someone comes in and offers you a first round pick for either one of those guys, you have to take it. Obviously, the hope would be you use that first round pick and turn it into something else. If we're drafting two players in the first round this year, I don't think anyone's going to be happy, and no one should be happy. So that's where the trade deadline is an interesting approach for Kevyn Adams this year, because does he try to swing big for the hockey trade at the trade deadline, or does he just collect assets and plan for the offseason? Because something that you and I we have talked about, but like, we're both under the assumption Kevyn Adams isn't going anywhere, right?
Nope.
Okay. So that's where that also adds another layer to this trade deadline to me is he going to stock the cupboard to maybe finally be aggressive in the offseason, or is he going to try and be aggressive now? That to me is the interesting story with the Sabres. So
what you're saying is job security. If it was in more danger, you'd expect a big swing come this.
I keep going back to that last trade deadline that Tim Murray had, where he made no moves and was fired. I don't think that's happening with Kevyn Adams. But if Kevyn Adams makes 0 moves because he's hoping to sign Greenway and Zucker, and then doesn't get either signed, that's a bad look.
It is. And Nemesnikov from Winnipeg was the other re-sign. He got 2 years, $6 million, so 3 per. Like, if they could re-sign Zucker for $3 to $4 million, I think that's a quality guy, 32 years old.
I'd sign Zucker for the same salary he's at now.
At what, like a 2-3 year deal?
2 years. If you got to go 2 years, $5 million per year. Why not? Like I said, if they keep both, I'm fine with that. But you need to get both signed, which is hard to do in a week and a half. And then 2, if you keep both, you have to move other forwards anywhere. Like I said, it'll be interesting because, like, does the Dylan Cousins rumors finally come to a head, or does he just go straight up with the rental guys? But either way, I think he needs to be active at this trade deadline.
At least have the phones on. I mean, we hear him talk. When he talked to the media about a month ago with that train wreck press conference, when he said that he's on the phone all the time talking trade. Well, we haven't seen anything yet. How many trades have we seen? I think we've seen 30 trades in the National Hockey League. Other than that AHL swap that they did, because I'm not even counting that, they haven't made any moves. They put Obey Kubel on waivers after it only took a 13-game losing streak, and then a month after that to finally put somebody on waivers at least. But you've got a guy like Zach Benson on the fourth line. To me, that's not productive. I don't think that's good for his development, because he's not going to be a fourth-line player. You want to develop him into the next Peyton Krebs as a first-round guy that's just going to be a fourth-line center. I don't think they want to do that with Zach Benson. They've got high hopes for him. So, yeah, I meant, like you said, if they move out Zucker, like they better have a plan to replace that, or make a hockey trade where they get a top 6 forward. Like, it's funny that Colorado is looking to possibly move Middlestat to try to upgrade their second line center role. The Crosby pipe dream. I don't know if that's going to happen or not, but it's just funny that Colorado's looking to move Middlestat, and Buffalo's kind of looking for a top 6 winger. I'm not saying that they would ever, entertain bringing him back. I don't think he wants to come back, but it's just funny how those things kind of work now, a year after that trade was made, that, it looks good on the Sabres end with Byram, but now he needs a contract in the offseason. Like you said, Cousins and Byram are those two guys, are tougher trades to make in season, but I mean, we just saw that Nietzsche and Rantanen trade, so they can be done, but realistically, if you're going to ask me if I'm a betting man, I just say Kevyn Adams moves 2 of those 3 UFAs, and we don't really see those big moves, because I don't think his job security is something that he's worried about right now.
Yeah, and interesting with Byram, because I kind of have this talk with a buddy of mine at work, and I'm just like, we both kind of agree, like, the Byram move move could make sense, but like I'm not in a rush to move Byram. He's 2 years away from being a UFA, so no matter what, he's on your team for 2 years. You don't have to rush to move Byram. Him and Dahlin are working together. If I'm the Sabres, I'm holding on to that unless that Pettersson deal does come up. But like when you look at Vancouver and the moves that they made, they acquired Marcus Pettersson. I don't know why they would want a guy like Bowen Byram. So to me, if I'm Kevyn Adams, I'm keeping Bowen Byram for at least the next 2 years because he has to be here. He's a pending restricted free agent. So also another layer that we can talk about later because it's offseason stuff, but the Sabres have so many pending RFAs that Adams is going to have to be busy in the summer with his own housekeeping stuff. So if you want to try, if I'm him, again, easier said than done, but if I'm him, I'm looking for that hockey trade right now. So my offseason kind of be mapped out a little bit differently because you have McLeod, you have Quinn, who will be a little bit easier because he's played himself out of anything besides a 1 to 2 year, $1 million a year contract. But you have McLeod, Byram, Peterka, who are 3 key RFAs. And then if you want to throw Devin Levi in there as well, but again, I think because of his AHL playing time, like it seems like his contract will be a little bit easier, but he has some key RFAs to re-sign and guys that I know he might be a little scared of committing to because of what's happened in the past, but guys like McLeod and Peterka have been playing really well and are probably worthy of some term. So I don't know. It'll be interesting. So I hope like I said, I hope we're sitting here when we do our trade deadline episode and either Zucker and Greenway are signed to extensions or at least one of them is gone because I think if both of them are here past the deadline with no contract extension, that's a failure. But part of me thinks that there's actually a strong possibility that that is the case. And to me, that's bad.
So when you look at it, Carolina, Montreal twice, San Jose, Tampa Bay, Florida, we're going to it's deadline day, so you can't really count that because they'll probably make the moves before that game starts. So, 10 points here available. Like, is there any way where the Sabres win 8 of 10, which is, Montreal twice and San Jose, those are winnable games. Tampa Bay.
Those are 3 big games.
Tampa Bay and Carolina, you could probably chalk up as losses, but there's 6 points right there against Montreal twice and San Jose that could be had if they play up to potential. So do you think there's any way that their next 5 games they somehow play themselves out of cellars, which as stupid as that sounds, like where they think that, maybe we'll hold on to these guys even without extensions for guys like Zucker and Greenway, that there might be some sort of scenario where Kevyn Adams says, you know what, I'm going to stick with this core that I have right here.
The thought has crossed my mind. I'd be lying if I said it didn't. The only thing I can say is I think there are like so many games between now and then, like where the teams in front of them play each other to where like I think, let me take a look. I think was it tomorrow? Yeah, like tomorrow Detroit plays Columbus. Those are both wild card teams.
Yep.
So like, all right, so
you have to leapfrog every team.
Yeah, it's like to me, like that's what I look at is there like the game, like the rest of their schedule for the most part, I'm not saying it's easy, but like there's a decent handful of winnable games, but I think because they have to leapfrog so many teams, there's no way they can do that. Now, the different question is, do you believe this front office is silly enough to trick themselves into thinking that if they win 4 out of the next 5? Wouldn't put it past them. But like I said, if you use the Granlund trade as a bit of a comparable, if someone offers you a first-round pick for one of your 2 rental forwards, you have to take it no matter what. And I know you're not in the process or business collecting first-round picks anymore, but that's a valuable piece to have for someone you're not sure will be on your team next year. So I don't know. Like I said, it's an interesting but not really that interesting trade deadline for the Sabres because they don't really have like the premier piece, but they do have some good pieces that probably should look to move. And I think looking at Puckpedia here, like Greenway does have an 8-team no trade list, but let's be honest, you're Jordan Greenway, you'll waive that to go to like say Winnipeg comes calling, well they're one of the best teams in the NHL. I think you waive that to go there for 20 games. So it'll be very interesting. I'm hopeful he'll do the smart thing, but I guess we'll see what happens when we talk next Saturday.
Yeah, I guess we'll have to wait and see there. We'll be optimistic, hopefully, and maybe be surprised with some sort of move that Kevyn Adams makes at the deadline here. With the 3
I will say this:
UFAs.
there always seems to be one move on trade deadline day. Not by the Sabres, just one move on trade deadline day where you're like, wow, like a couple of years ago it was Mantha for Verana. That's more than a couple of years ago. But I remember that trade. I remember, blast from the past, like the Cody Hodgson for Zach Kassian trade, the Martin Erat for Philip Forsberg trade. Like there seems to be like moves that happen on trade deadline day. So like these big shocking moves are possible. Hell, last year, Byram for Middlestad is a hockey trade. I know it didn't happen on trade deadline day, but it happened just before it. So like there is precedent for these moves happening, so I'm not holding out, not completely, sold or giving up on the fact that maybe Adams pulls something off. But I think at the very least, the UFAs are interesting enough to have Sabres fans intrigued with what happens on this trade deadline.